October 23, 2004. In the quiet suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, two 19-year-old friends walked out of a college party and were never seen again. For the next 7 years, their families would live in the grip of unimaginable uncertainty, organizing searches, posting flyers across the city, begging for any clue that might bring them hope. But in 2011, an unexpected confession would reveal a truth so disturbing, it would forever change how this community viewed its own neighbors. What kind of secret could stay buried for so long? And why did someone finally decide to break the silence? Phoenix, one of the fastest-growing cities in the country at the time, was a mix of historic neighborhoods and rapidly expanding suburbs. In the southern outskirts, in a modest community called Southridge Estates, lived the families at the center of this story. The Millers were a working-class family. Robert Miller, the father, worked as a supervisor at a textile plant, while his wife, Karen, managed the household and occasionally sold beauty products to neighbors. Their son, David, 19, had finished high school the previous year and was working part-time at an electronics store, saving every dollar to start college. David was well-liked in the neighborhood, a responsible kid who often helped elderly neighbors carry groceries or fix small things around their homes. Just a few blocks away, in a 2-story house with a small front yard, lived the Harris family. Jack Harris ran a successful auto repair shop in downtown Phoenix, while his wife, Gloria, worked as a secretary at a local elementary school. Their son, Chris, also 19, had been David's best friend since grade school. Chris was more outgoing than David. He loved rock music and played guitar in a small local band called Urban Echo, which performed at neighborhood bars and parties. The two friends bonded over football and were devoted fans of the Arizona Wildcats. Throughout their teenage years, they spent countless afternoons playing ball at the park, watching games on TV at Chris's house, or talking about their dreams for the future while walking through the neighborhood streets. By October 2004, Phoenix was experiencing steady growth, but like many fast-expanding areas, some neighborhoods on the edges of the city were beginning to face social challenges. Still, Southridge Estates was known for its tight-knit community. Neighbors looked out for each other, kids played freely in the streets, and families often gathered for birthdays, barbecues, and block parties. News traveled fast here, so the disappearance of two well-loved young men would send shockwaves that lasted for years. That Saturday morning, October 23rd, dawned clear and cool. The temperature hovered around 65 degrees, typical fall weather for Phoenix. David spent the morning at the electronics store where he worked weekends, stocking shelves and helping customers, saving every paycheck for tuition. He clocked out at 2 p.m. and walked home like always. Chris spent the morning rehearsing with Urban Echo in a friend's garage. They had a gig coming up next month at a local bar, and Chris was excited. They'd been working on their own versions of songs by bands like Green Day and Foo Fighters. Rehearsal wrapped up around 3 p.m., and Chris headed home. At 4:30 p.m., David walked over to Chris's house. Karen Miller remembered clearly seeing her son stroll down the street wearing the navy blue jacket she'd bought him 2 months earlier. "He always told me where he was going," she would later say. That day, he said he was hanging out with Chris and would probably be back for dinner. At the Harris house, Gloria was brewing coffee when David arrived. The two boys settled into the living room, watching TV and talking. From the backyard, Jack Harris, working on a car engine, heard them chatting about weekend plans. They mentioned going to the movies on Sunday, he recalled later, some action flick that just came out. Then Chris brought up something else, a party that night at a college acquaintance's house. The host was Mark Sullivan, a 21-year-old student who lived on the far west side of Phoenix. Chris had met Mark through the local music scene and had been to his house once before. Mark said it's just a small get-together, Chris told David. Some friends, music, maybe a few beers. Nothing crazy. David hesitated. It was Saturday night, but he had to work early Monday and wasn't big on parties. Chris, though, insisted. "Come on," he said. "We've been grinding all week. Let's have some fun." By 6 p.m. they agreed. They each went home to eat dinner and get ready. At the Millers, Karen served her usual Saturday chicken stew. During dinner, David casually mentioned he'd be going out with Chris. "Where to?" asked Robert, his dad. "A party," David said. "At a friend of Chris's. I'll be back early. Karen, as mothers do, felt a twinge of worry, but said nothing. Be careful, she told him. Call if you'll be late. David finished dinner around 7:30, changed into dark jeans and a white t-shirt, kissed his parents goodbye, and said his usual, "Love you guys." Those would be the last words they ever heard from him. At the Harris house, Chris was finishing tamales Gloria had made earlier when his dad asked about the evening plans. Just a party with David, Chris explained. At a friend's place. Might play some music too. Knowing both boys were responsible, Jack wasn't concerned. Be safe, he told them. And don't drink if you're driving. We'll catch the bus, Chris assured him. Or maybe a ride back. By 8:15, Chris was ready. Black t-shirt, favorite jeans, worn white sneakers, wallet in his pocket. He met David on the corner, like they'd planned. Several neighbors saw them walking toward the bus stop, laughing and talking. Mrs. Thompson, a 65-year-old who always sat on her porch evenings, called out, "Take care, boys." They waved back. Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. The bus to Mark Sullivan's neighborhood arrived at 8:45 p.m. The driver, a man named Frank Ruiz, who had driven that route for 5 years, would later recall 2 young men boarding that night, but he couldn't be sure it was them. It was a busy Saturday evening. Mark's house was in a middle-class subdivision about 45 minutes away by bus. A 2-story home with a big backyard, perfect for parties. His parents were out of town visiting relatives in Flagstaff, leaving him free to host. By the time David and Chris arrived around 9:30 p.m., about 25 people were already there, mostly college kids and young professionals in their early 20s. There was music, drinks, and the usual weekend energy in the air. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Mark Sullivan would later recall that both young men seemed to be enjoying themselves at the party. Chris knew a few people from the local music scene, he said. David was quieter but looked relaxed, talking with different groups as the night went on. The party itself was uneventful at first. Music, laughter, conversations drifting through the house. Chris even picked up a guitar someone had brought and played a couple of songs while David sat nearby, smiling. Around 11:30 p.m., several guests noticed David and Chris speaking with a group of 3 young men no one seemed to know. Well, they weren't from the area, didn't look like students, and carried themselves a little differently from the others. Still, witnesses agreed the conversation looked friendly. No arguments, no tension. Just after midnight, David and Chris headed for the door. Mark was the last person to speak with them. They told me they were leaving, he remembered later. I asked if they needed me to call a cab, but Chris said they already had a ride. They thanked me for the night and left. At about 12:15 a.m. on Sunday, October 24th, witnesses saw the 2 friends walking down the driveway toward the street, apparently headed for the main road where they could catch a bus or find a taxi. It was the last time anyone would see David Miller or Chris Harris alive. Sunday morning in Southridge Estates began as quietly as any other. At 7 a.m., Karen Miller got up to start breakfast. She noticed David hadn't come home yet, but didn't panic right away. It wasn't typical for him to stay out all night, but it wasn't entirely impossible either. By 8:30 a.m., she called the Harris household to see if maybe David had stayed over with Chris. Gloria Harris picked up the phone, and the uneasy realization hit. Chris wasn't home either. Both mothers felt the first chill of worry, but told themselves the boys had probably crashed at someone else's place after the party. Maybe they stayed at that Mark kid's house, Gloria suggested. Karen didn't have his number, but she remembered David mentioning he knew Mark through other musicians. They decided to wait until noon before taking further action. By midday, with no sign of the boys, Karen and Gloria met at the Harris home. Robert Miller and Jack Harris joined them, agreeing it was time to start making calls. The first call was to Mark Sullivan, whose number Jack got from a friend in the music scene. Mark confirmed David and Chris had left his house just after midnight. They seemed fine when they left, Mark said. They told me they had a way home. I figured maybe someone gave them a ride. That answer made everyone more anxious. If they'd left intending to go home, why hadn't they arrived? The family spent the next few hours calling every friend, coworker, and old classmate they could think of. Nobody had seen David or Chris since the party. By 6 p.m., Robert and Jack drove to the local sheriff's substation to file a missing persons report. Sergeant Michael Castillo took down the details. "How long have they been gone?" he asked. "Since last night," Robert answered. "They went to a party and never came home." The sergeant explained that technically, the young men wouldn't be considered officially missing until 24 hours had passed, but he gathered preliminary information anyway. Recent photos, descriptions of what they'd been wearing, any plans they might have mentioned. "Most of these cases resolve themselves," Sergeant Castillo said in a practiced, reassuring tone. "Young people sometimes take off without telling anyone, but we'll start asking questions." That night, no one in either family slept. Karen Miller sat by the front window until dawn, waiting for the sound of David's keys in the door. Gloria Harris paced through the house, checking the driveway again and again, hoping Chris might appear. Monday, October 25th, marked the start of what would become the most intense search Southridge Estates had ever seen. The families returned to the sheriff's office to file the official report. The case went to Detective Raymond Moore, a veteran investigator with 15 years handling missing persons. Detective Moore began by visiting Mark Sullivan's house, interviewing every guest he could track down. All accounts were the same. David and Chris had been in good spirits, no arguments, no trouble, except for one detail. Multiple witnesses mentioned the 3 unknown young men David and Chris had spoken with before leaving. Nobody knew their names. Nobody knew who invited them. Nobody even remembered seeing them arrive. "It's frustrating," Detective Moore told the families. "We've got this lead, 3 guys who spoke with your sons, but no way to identify them yet. We're working with Mark to see if he can remember who brought them." Meanwhile, the families launched their own search. Karen and Gloria printed hundreds of flyers with the boys' photos and descriptions, posting them on streetlights, in stores, on bus stops, anywhere people might see them. The response from the community was immediate. Neighbors, co-workers, even strangers joined search parties, combing parks, empty lots, and back roads. The local church held prayer vigils. The story hit the front page of the Arizona Republic, the biggest paper in the region, with photos of David and Chris above the headline, 2 Phoenix teens missing, families beg for help. Local radio stations mentioned the case daily, especially during morning commutes when thousands were listening. Dozens of calls poured in with possible sightings at bus stations, in malls, even in other cities. Every single tip was checked. None led anywhere. Detective Moore expanded his search to hospitals, jails, and morgues across the region. He alerted police in neighboring counties. Weeks passed with no sign of David or Chris. There was no crime scene, no blood, no belongings left behind. It was as if the 2 young men had stepped off that suburban street and vanished into thin air. The toll on the families was crushing. Karen Miller lost weight rapidly and stopped sleeping. Robert kept working but grew withdrawn, staring into space for long stretches. Gloria Harris quit her job temporarily, devoting every hour to the search, printing flyers, organizing volunteers, chasing down leads. Jack closed his auto shop for 2 weeks to help. The whole neighborhood changed. Parents kept tighter curfews on their kids. Community barbecues stopped. An air of suspicion settled over the once friendly streets. It wasn't the same neighborhood anymore, recalled Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor who had waved to the boys that last night. If it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. By December 2004, 2 months in, the searches slowed, not from lack of hope, but because there was nowhere left to look. Detective Moore kept the case open but had no new leads. Christmas was unbearable. Karen still cooked David's favorite dishes. Gloria left Chris's presents under the tree, unable to put them away. 2005 began with fading tips and fewer calls. But one man refused to let the case go quiet. Father Michael Harris, pastor of the local church, no relation to Chris's family despite the name. He'd known David and Chris from youth programs and spoke about them often during Sunday services. "These boys were the best of our community," he told his congregation. "We cannot forget them." Father Michael held monthly prayer services and kept the boys' photos at the altar, a constant reminder that the search for answers was far from over. Father Michael not only kept the case alive in the public eye, but also provided emotional and spiritual support to both families, helping them hold on to hope through the darkest years. By 2006, 2 years after David and Chris vanished, the families decided to hire a private investigator. They had spent nearly all their savings on the search, but managed to raise enough to bring in a seasoned detective named Aaron Vega, known for handling difficult missing person cases. Vega combed through every report, every interview transcript, re-questioning many of the original witnesses. His approach was different from the police investigation. He focused less on physical evidence and more on behavioral clues, psychology, motives. But after 6 months, he reached the same grim conclusion as Detective Moore before him. There simply wasn't enough evidence to explain what had happened. "What troubles me most," Vega told the families, "is the complete absence of anything. In most disappearances, there's something, a clue, a witness, a belonging. Here, it's as if they just ceased to exist." By 2007, 3 years after that October night, reality pressed down harder. Robert Miller and Jack Harris returned to full-time work, not because they stopped caring, but because bills had to be paid. Karen and Gloria continued searching, but less frantically now. The case remained open in name only. Detective Moore had been reassigned, and a younger, less experienced investigator now carried the file. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss, when there's no body, no closure, no way to truly grieve. The families lived in that limbo for years, caught between hope and despair. Then, in 2008, a breakthrough of sorts, though not the kind anyone expected. A woman named Rosa Campbell came forward. She'd been at Mark Sullivan's party that night. In 2004, police had interviewed her back then, but she'd kept something to herself. "I saw David and Chris talking to those 3 guys nobody knew," Rosa told Gloria Harris. "But I also saw something else. When they left, they didn't walk toward the main road like we all thought. I saw them head the other way, toward some parked cars. This changed everything. It suggested the boys might have accepted a ride, rather than looking for a bus or taxi as assumed for years." "Did you see them get into a car?" Gloria asked. Rosa shook her head. "It was dark. People were coming and going. I just saw them walking that way, not toward the avenue." The new detective re-interviewed Rosa and added her statement to the case file. He tried to find other witnesses who might have seen David and Chris near the cars, but after 4 years, memories were blurred, details lost. In 2009, 5 years after the disappearance, the families held a public vigil in the Central Park of Southridge Estates, the same place where David and Chris had played football as kids. "We want everyone to know we haven't forgotten," Robert Miller told the crowd. "Our sons still matter, to us, to this community. Until we know what happened, there can be no peace." Hundreds attended. Candles glowed through the night. Local news crews covered the vigil, reviving public interest in the case. Leads trickled in afterward, people with rumors, possible sightings, but as always, none held up. Then came August 15, 2011, nearly 7 years since David and Chris vanished. That day, a massive summer storm swept across Phoenix, dumping record-breaking rainfall, 6 inches in just a few hours. Streets turned to rivers, entire neighborhoods flooded. One of the hardest-hit areas? Westbrook Heights, the neighborhood where Mark Sullivan's 2004 party had taken place. Among the damaged properties was an abandoned house on Westbrook Drive, about 8 blocks from Mark's old place. Vacant for years because of a bitter inheritance dispute, it had become a dumping ground for trash and old furniture. On August 16th, as floodwaters receded, city workers arrived to clear debris and assess structural damage. They had no idea what they were about to find inside that house. The cleanup crew that morning included 5 city workers under the supervision of civil engineer Carlos Mendoza, who oversaw post-flood operations in Westbrook Heights. Around 10:30 a.m., while clearing debris behind the abandoned house on Westbrook Drive, one of the workers, a man named Steven Ruiz, noticed something odd near a large tree. The floodwaters had eroded a patch of ground, exposing what looked like scraps of fabric buried shallowly in the soil. "At first I thought it was just trash," Steven would later recall. "But when I got closer I realized it was a jacket, and it looked like someone had buried it deliberately. He called over his supervisor. When Carlos Mendoza examined it, he immediately stopped the entire cleanup. Half buried in the mud was a navy blue jacket, exactly the kind Karen Miller had described, her son David wearing the night he disappeared. "I knew this wasn't right," Mendoza said later. "The way it was buried, it wasn't random. And the fact it was this close to where the party happened, that was no coincidence." He made the right call. He touched nothing and phoned the Phoenix Police Department at 11:15 a.m. Detective Fernando Aguilar, who had taken over the cold case 2 years earlier, arrived with a forensic team by 12:30 p.m. Yellow tape went up. The backyard became a crime scene. Hours of careful excavation revealed the family's worst fears. Alongside the jacket, investigators unearthed the remains of both David Miller and Chris Harris, along with some of their personal belongings. They had been buried in a shallow grave less than 5 feet deep, covered with quicklime in what appeared to be an attempt to speed decomposition. The discovery ended nearly 7 years of uncertainty with the answer the families had dreaded. Most that afternoon at 4:30, Detective Aguilar called Karen Miller. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice heavy, "we've found David and Chris." Karen didn't need to hear the rest. She already knew. "They're—" she began, but couldn't finish. "I'm so sorry," the detective said quietly. "They're not alive. But now we can find out who did this, and why." News spread fast. By nightfall, neighbors crowded the Millers and Harris's front yards, offering prayers, food, and embraces. Father Michael came immediately, standing with the families, reminding them, "Now we know where they are," he said softly. "Now we seek justice." The case shifted overnight from missing persons to double homicide. Detective Aguilar, working with Maricopa County District Attorney Thomas Reed, launched the city's largest murder investigation in decades. The initial autopsy, performed by medical examiner Dr. Patricia Sanchez, revealed the boys had died from multiple stab wounds to the chest, delivered with precision, as if the killer knew exactly where to strike. These weren't random injuries, Dr. Sanchez told investigators. The fatal wounds were deliberate, controlled. Your suspect either has anatomical knowledge or experience inflicting violence. Even more disturbing, the boys were killed right there, in that abandoned house. They hadn't been taken elsewhere first. The property records showed the house had belonged to the Ramos family, who died in a car accident in 1999. Since then, legal disputes kept it vacant for over a decade. Someone knew this place was empty. Detective Aguilar told the families. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was planned. Investigators combed through the property records and found signs the house had been used off and on. Fire pits in the backyard, beer bottles, even bedding inside. Someone had been there before. Witnesses from the 2004 party were re-interviewed. With new context, old memories took on new meaning. Mark Sullivan, the party host, now recalled one chilling detail. One of those 3 guys nobody knew, the ones talking to David and Chris, he asked where the boys lived. "At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, it seems strange." The question raised a terrifying possibility. David and Chris weren't random victims. They were chosen. But chosen by whom, and why? Detective Aguilar dug into 2004 police records. Westbrook Heights had small-time gangs back then, mostly car theft, some low-level drug trade. Nothing usually this violent. If it was just robbery, why take them to an abandoned house? Why kill them with such precision? The case took a sharp turn in September 2011, 1 month after the bodies were found. Aguilar received a call. A young man's voice, nervous, speaking in a whisper. "The guy who killed those boys still lives in Westbrook Heights," the caller said. "He works at a mechanic shop on Juarez Avenue. His name's Victor. He was at that party." Then the line went dead. Aguilar checked every auto shop on Juarez Avenue. At the second shop, Gonzalez Auto Service, the owner confirmed he had an employee named Victor Delgado, age 26. "Victor's been here 3 years, said the owner. "Ernesto Gonzalez. Quiet guy, shows up on time. Never any trouble I've heard of." Further digging revealed Victor had lived in the neighborhood for years. Back in 2004, he was 19. living with his mother just blocks from the party house. He also had a younger brother, Sergio, 17 at the time. Both had minor juvenile records, petty theft, vandalism, but nothing suggesting murder. Aguilar put Victor under discreet surveillance. For weeks, nothing. Victor worked days at the shop, went home evenings, lived a routine life. By October 2011, exactly 7 years after the murders, Detective Aguilar noticed a change in Victor Delgado's routine. The man who'd lived such a predictable, quiet life now seemed jumpy. He skipped work some days. He avoided certain places in the neighborhood. It's like he knows we're watching him, Aguilar told his supervisor. Or like something else has him spooked. The answer came October 28th, when a second anonymous call came in. This time it was a young woman, speaking fast, her voice tight with fear. "Victor Delgado's going to run," she said. His brother Sergio told him. "The police are onto him. They're leaving town this weekend." Then she hung up. Aguilar consulted with County DA Thomas Reed about picking up Delgado. "We don't have enough for a formal arrest," Reed said. "But bring him in for voluntary questioning. If he refuses or flees, that gives us more to work with." On October 30th, Aguilar went to Gonzalez Auto Service. Victor hadn't shown up for work that morning, a first since surveillance began. Aguilar drove straight to the Delgado house. Victor's mother, Maria Delgado, a 52-year-old housekeeper, answered the door, her hands shaking. "Is Victor home?" Aguilar asked. "No," she said softly. "He left early, said he had things to do." She wouldn't meet his eyes. Behind her, a half-packed suitcase sat on a bed in plain view. "Mrs. Delgado," Aguilar said gently but firmly, "I need to speak with your son about a very serious matter. If he runs, it will only make things worse." Maria Delgado began to cry. "He's been so nervous," she admitted, "having nightmares, talking in his sleep about terrible things. But he never told me what." Aguilar leveled with her. "We're investigating the murders of 2 boys who vanished 7 years ago," he said. "We have reason to believe Victor knows what happened. If he leaves now, it will look like guilt, whether he's guilty or not." Maria Delgado sat heavily in a chair, sobbing. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. Victor was never the same after 2004. Aguilar issued a regional alert for Victor Delgado. The manhunt lasted 5 tense days. On November 4th, police found him holed up in a cheap motel outside Tucson, Arizona, registered under a false name. He had clothes for several days, about $600 in cash, and a 6-inch hunting knife in his bag. Also inside, a notebook filled with fragmented sentences, some sounding a lot like confession notes. The interrogation began November 5th, 9 a.m., at Phoenix Police Headquarters. Present were Detective Aguilar, DA Reed, and Public Defender Michael Torres. At first, Victor denied everything. He said he'd never met David or Chris, wasn't at the party, didn't know anything about any murders. "I wasn't there," he repeated. "You've got the wrong guy." Aguilar stayed calm. He showed Victor employment records placing him jobless in October 2004. Witness statements placing him at the party. Evidence tying him to the abandoned house. "Victor," Aguilar said quietly, "we know you were there. We know you knew that house. Tell us the truth." For hours, Victor kept denying, but his hands shook. Sweat ran down his face. Then Aguilar pulled out the notebook, read one line aloud. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. We only meant to scare them." "What wasn't supposed to happen, Victor?" Aguilar asked. Victor broke. Tears came hard, shaking his whole body. "I didn't want them to die," he whispered. "I never wanted that." The confession spilled out over 3 long hours. It began with a grudge. Victor's younger brother, Sergio, had been humiliated in a neighborhood fight a month before the party. A busted lip, bruised pride. He told Victor and another friend, Raul Escobar, that they needed to make a point. The plan, Victor said, was to find the guys who'd jumped Sergio, scare them, maybe rough them up a little, nothing more. But at the party, Sergio couldn't identify the right kids. Too many faces, too much noise. Then Sergio pointed at David and Chris, said he thought maybe they were involved. He wasn't sure. He was angry. He wanted action. David and Chris, of course, had nothing to do with the fight. Wrong place, wrong time. Victor admitted they lured the boys by offering free weed, claiming it was stashed nearby. The boys said they didn't use drugs but finally agreed to walk over. Probably just curious, maybe feeling peer pressure. They led them to the abandoned house. Just to scare them, Victor insisted. But things spiraled fast. When the boys realized there were no drugs, that they'd been tricked, they wanted to leave. Sergio snapped. Raul pulled a knife. David said he was going to call the cops. Victor recalled. That set Sergio off. Raul too. They went crazy. Carlos tried to protect David. Sergio stabbed David. Raul stabbed Carlos. It happened so fast, Victor said, sobbing again. I tried to stop them, but it was too late. Afterward, the three buried the bodies with tools from the house's shed, covered them with quicklime Raul found inside, swore never to speak of it again. Sergio died in a motorcycle accident in 2008. Raul disappeared right after the murders. When asked why he finally confessed, Victor looked exhausted. Because when they found the bodies, he said, I knew time was running out, and I can't carry it anymore. 7 years of this. It's been killing me too. The anonymous calls, those came from his girlfriend. She'd threatened to go to police herself if he didn't. 2 weeks later, on November 18th, police tracked Raul Escobar to El Paso, Texas, where he'd been living under a false name, working construction. Confronted with Victor's confession, Raul finally admitted his role. His story matched Victor's, but added more about the planning, and about Sergio's rage that night. Raul Escobar confirmed during questioning that the attack had been partly premeditated, though the violence had spun far beyond what they intended. We never planned to kill anyone, he said flatly. But once things got out of control, we panicked. None of us knew how to stop it. On December 3, 2011, 7 years and 1 month after David and Chris vanished, their families finally faced the men responsible. The preliminary hearing at Maricopa County Superior Court was tense, silent except for muffled sobs from the packed gallery. Karen Miller, who had held herself together for years, finally let the pain and anger spill out. You didn't just kill our sons, she told Victor Delgado and Raul Escobar, her voice shaking. You killed our families too. 7 years of waking up every day wondering, praying, begging for answers. You stole all of that from us. Robert Miller, usually the stoic one, spoke through clenched teeth. My son was a good boy, he said. He never hurt anyone. And you killed him for something he didn't even do. Gloria Harris fixed her eyes on Delgado. My son had dreams. He wanted to make music, start a family. You took all of that away over a misunderstanding. And Jack Harris, Carlos's father, spoke last. 7 years, he said, his voice raw. 7 years wondering if maybe they were alive somewhere. 7 years robbed of even saying goodbye. Delgado wept openly. There's nothing I can say to undo this, he murmured. But not a single day has gone by without thinking of David and Chris. Not a single night without nightmares. Escobar, mostly silent until then, finally spoke when the judge asked if he had anything to say. I'm sorry, he said simply. I know it means nothing now, but I am. The trial lasted months. Delgado received 25 years for second-degree murder and concealment. Escobar, judged the most violent, got 30 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution, though the amounts were symbolic given their poverty. Local news covered every hearing. The case became a cautionary tale of how trivial grudges and reckless choices can turn deadly. For the families, the verdict brought truth, if not peace. I don't feel better, Karen Miller said afterward, but I feel different. We finally know. After 7 years of darkness, we have the truth. Father Michael held a memorial service for David and Chris once the trial ended. The church overflowed with neighbors, friends, and strangers who had followed the case for years. They didn't die in vain, Father Michael told the crowd. Their story reminds us every choice has consequences, and violence can never be the answer. In the years that followed, the families created the David and Chris Foundation to help families of missing persons and fund youth violence prevention programs. Karen became an outspoken advocate. No one should go through what we did. If our story can save even one family this pain, then maybe some good can come from all this. Victor Delgado and Raul Escobar were sent to separate Arizona state prisons. Both entered rehabilitation programs. Delgado, especially, began speaking to at-risk youth about violence and regret, hoping his story might stop others from making the same mistakes. The abandoned house where the boys were found was eventually torn down. In its place, the community built a small memorial park with a plaque bearing David and Chris's names. Each October 23rd, neighbors gather there for a candlelight vigil, promising to remember and to keep fighting violence in their community. Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor who waved to the boys that last night, lived to see the park built. She died in 2014 at 85, but until then, she visited often, calling them my boys. By 2016, 5 years after the sentencing, Karen Miller received a letter from Delgado. Inside was a poem for David and a promise to spend the rest of his life, warning others about reckless choices and violence. "I didn't expect it," Karen admitted. "I don't know if forgiveness is possible, but at least he's trying to do some good now." Robert Miller retired early, his health worn down by years of stress. He spent his final years working in the foundation's garden, planting David's favorite flowers. Gloria Harris returned to her elementary school job, championing anti-bullying programs and conflict resolution classes. "If we teach kids to solve problems with words," she said, "maybe no other parent will have to bury a child because of anger." Jack Harris reopened his auto shop but never recovered from losing Carlos. He died in 2018 of a heart attack, neighbors saying he died of a broken heart. At his funeral, musicians played Carlos's favorite songs. The case became a study subject in criminal justice courses across Arizona, an example of how cold cases can break open years later, and how confessions bring closure even when justice comes late. Detective Fernando Aguilar, who solved it, retired in 2019. "The truth always comes out," he said. "It might take years, it might hurt, but families deserve the truth, no matter how long it takes." 15 years after that October night, the David and Chris Foundation hosted a youth violence prevention summit. Karen Miller spoke to a silent room. "We lost our sons because of reckless anger and terrible decisions," she said. "We can't bring them back, but we can fight to make sure no other family suffers like this." In 2020, Arizona passed new laws requiring faster, more thorough investigations of missing persons, spurred in part by the failures revealed in this case. Today, nearly 2 decades later, the Memorial Park remains the community's heart. Each year on October 23rd, candles light the night as neighbors gather to remember David and Chris, vowing to choose peace over violence. Carlos's guitar, once gathering dust in a closet, now hangs in the local church, sometimes played during special services. David's tools were donated to a vocational program for low-income youth, so others might build the future he never got to. Even those on the story's edges were changed. Mark Sullivan, whose party unknowingly set events in motion, became a social worker helping families in crisis. And Rosa Campbell, the woman who years later revealed the boys had walked toward parked cars, not the main road, became an advocate for speaking up sooner. "If I'd talked earlier," she often said, "maybe this would have ended differently." David and Chris died because of mistaken identity, a single chain of bad decisions spiraling out of control. Their story stands as a permanent warning. Every choice carries weight. Every moment of anger can change lives forever. And in Phoenix, Arizona, 2 families turned grief into a movement, ensuring their sons would be remembered not just for how they died, but for what their memory built afterward.